July 1944, Normandy. Dawn breaks through smoke-filled air that reeks of cordite and burning fuel. German tank commanders called it the American sardine can. Laughter echoes through concrete bunkers. Intelligence reports pile up on steel tables. Another Sherman variant rolling off Detroit assembly lines. They had Tigers with 88mm guns that could punch through any Allied armor at 2,000 meters. They had Panthers with sloped fronts deflecting American shells like raindrops. What could mass-produced American Boxers possibly do against 2 years of German engineering perfection? But what they didn't know was this. They weren't fighting tanks. They were fighting American factories. Stay to hear the radio intercept that turned that laughter into absolute terror. Operation Cobra, July 25th. Wehrmacht observers in concrete positions count with growing disbelief. 600 Shermans cresting Hill 117. The ground trembles. Tank tracks churn Norman soil into paste. In exactly 72 minutes, not 600 tanks total across the entire front, 600 in one coordinated wave, followed by another 400, then another 300. Radio chatter goes dead silent, then explodes into frantic German voices. Unmöglich, comes the whispered transmission. Impossible, but Detroit had made impossible completely routine. At the Chrysler Tank Arsenal, welding sparks fly at 2 a.m., riveting guns hammer steel at 4 a.m., fresh coffee steams in break rooms at 6 a.m. Every 2 hours, every single 2 hours, another Sherman rolls through quality inspection. 2 hours, the exact same time German Tiger crews needed for basic maintenance. America had completed another 33-ton war machine. But what the Germans really didn't understand yet, they weren't fighting individual tanks. They were fighting American industrial multiplication. December 16th, 1944. St. Vith, Belgium. Snow crunches under German jackboots. Temperature hovers at -8 degrees Celsius. Oberst Klaus Weber, Afrika Korps veteran with scars across his left cheek, watches American armor through Zeiss field glasses. His breath fogs the lenses. He counts methodically, professionally. 12 Shermans in the lead column, 18 in the second, 24 in the third. Then more columns appear through the forest like mechanical ghosts. His after-action report, captured by Allied intelligence teams months later, reads with brutal honesty, individual Sherman inferior to our Panther in direct engagement. However, Americans consistently deploy 8 to 10 Shermans for every German tank in operational sectors. Mathematical superiority negates our technical advantages. Request immediate tactical doctrine revision. The mathematics were absolutely devastating. By late 1944, American factories had produced exactly 49,234 Sherman tanks. 49,234. Let that number sink in. Germany's total Tiger production across the entire war, 1,347 units. Not per month, not per year, total production ever, from first prototype to final surrender. German reaction when Wehrmacht intelligence finally calculated these production ratios. Documents describe strategic panic spreading through command levels. Coming up, the radio intercept that made veteran Wehrmacht commanders literally beg headquarters for permission to retreat. But raw production numbers told only half this devastating story. The Sherman wasn't just mass-produced in soulless American factories. It was mass-adapted through feedback loops that turned battlefield problems into factory solutions faster than German engineers could catalogue the changes. June 14th, 1944. Norman Bocage country. Sergeant Curtis Cullen, former New York cab driver turned tank commander, welds salvaged steel beams onto his Sherman's bow. The improvised hedge cutter breaks through walls that had stopped American advances for weeks. June 22nd, 8 days later, the Rhino attachment rolls off Michigan assembly lines with technical manuals and maintenance schedules. 8 days from battlefield improvisation to mass production. German Tiger modifications required months of testing at Kummersdorf, proving grounds, then additional months for production integration, assuming raw materials remained available through increasingly disrupted supply chains. They weren't fighting tanks. They were fighting American adaptation speed that made German engineering bureaucracy look glacial. The decisive psychological moment came through intercepted German radio traffic. December 16, 1944, exactly 14:32 hours Central European Time. 2nd SS Panzer Division Field Communications, recorded by Allied Signals Intelligence. American tank columns extend beyond visual range in multiple sectors. Exact count impossible to determine. Estimate minimum 200 vehicles approaching our positions from 3 directions simultaneously. Request immediate permission to withdraw. 12 hours of heated Wehrmacht headquarters discussions followed. The response that changed German armored doctrine forever: withdrawal approved. Avoid direct engagement unless confirmed. 3.1 numerical advantage. Preserve remaining assets for strategic defensive operations. That single intercept represented fundamental collapse of German tactical philosophy. For 2 years, Wehrmacht training had emphasized quality over quantity, individual excellence over mass deployment. One well-positioned Tiger tank, according to German armored schools, could destroy multiple enemy tanks through superior firepower and armor protection. But by late 1944, multiple enemies had become dozens of enemies, then scores of enemies. Tactical positioning became meaningless when American armor approached from every compass direction simultaneously. When destroyed, Shermans were replaced faster than German ammunition factories could produce shells to destroy them. The Sherman secret weapon wasn't its 75mm M3 gun. It was American logistical sustainability that treated tanks as replaceable tools rather than irreplaceable weapons. February 1945, Ruhr River crossing. Temperature -12 degrees Celsius. Ice forms on periscopes within minutes. Staff Sergeant Mike Colby, former Detroit auto worker who understood machinery like farmers understand soil, commands M4A3E8 Sherman, Lucky Strike. His tank hits a German river mine. The explosion echoes across frozen fields like artillery thunder. 4 hours later, exactly 4 hours, American recovery teams arrive with replacement track assemblies, spare road wheels, and thermoses of hot coffee. Parts cannibalized from 2 other damaged Shermans restore Lucky Strike to full operational condition. Colby reports over division radio nets. Minor delay resolved, ready for mission assignment. 50 kilometers east, identical mechanical failure disables Hauptmann Friedrich Kleist's Panzer IV Panther near Düsseldorf. Also a thrown track. 8 days waiting for replacement components shipped from Kassel through rail networks under constant air attack. Final orders arrive: abandon immobilized vehicle, retreat on foot to secondary positions. German recovery teams lack spare parts, replacement vehicles, fuel for transport trucks, or mechanics qualified for field repairs. The Panther sits frozen in a Belgian field until American forces capture it intact 3 weeks later. They weren't fighting tanks. They were fighting American logistics that made mechanical failure temporary rather than permanent. March 1945. Wehrmacht intelligence reports document with growing desperation. American tank superiority ratios reaching 15.1 in forward combat positions. Enemy replacement capabilities exceed our destruction capabilities by documented factor of 3.1. Recommend immediate strategic withdrawal to preserve remaining armored assets. But German tank crews were counting individual Shermans crossing their fields of view through gun sights and periscopes, not comprehending the broader tactical reality unfolding across hundreds of miles of front lines. When American forces reported Sherman combat losses of 3 to 4 tanks per engagement, and they did lose tanks regularly, replacement vehicles arrived within 24-48 hours via Liberty ship convoys and specialized tank landing ships. German replacement schedules, when replacements existed at all, measured in weeks or months through supply chains under constant Allied air interdiction. The clearest professional assessment came from an unexpected source. General Oberst Heinz Guderian himself, architect of German Blitzkrieg doctrine. His private evaluation, captured in Soviet intelligence files released decades later, cuts through wartime propaganda with surgical honesty. American Sherman individually inferior to our tank designs in direct technical specifications. Collectively, overwhelming through systematic deployment and replacement, they produce operational tanks faster than our remaining forces can destroy them. This is not a technical problem requiring improved guns or thicker armor. This represents complete industrial defeat, requiring political rather than military solution. Industrial defeat, not tactical defeat, not technical defeat. Industrial defeat that made German engineering excellence strategically irrelevant. They weren't fighting tanks, they were fighting American industrial philosophy that made scarcity obsolete. August 1944, Falaise Pocket. General Feldmarschall Günther von Kluge-Stahres, at situation maps covered in red pins, marking American armor concentrations. Each pin represents not individual tanks, but entire Sherman battalions moving with coordination that German doctrine hadn't anticipated. His chief of staff, Oberst Heinrich Müller, reports with barely concealed desperation, "Herr Generalfeldmarschall, American tank strength in this sector alone exceeds our total operational armor across all Western fronts." Von Kluge's response, recorded in his personal diary later captured by Allied forces, "We are not fighting an army. We are fighting an industrial nation that treats tanks like ammunition, expendable, replaceable, unlimited." September 1944, Aachen. Inside a reinforced concrete bunker that vibrates with each American artillery shell, Obergefreiter Franz Weber maintains radio contact with scattered Panther tanks defending the city approaches. His logbook, written in precise German script with hands that shake slightly from constant artillery bombardment, documents a pattern that would repeat across dozens of European cities. Day 1 counted 47. American tanks approaching from west, morale adequate. Day 2, destroyed 6 Shermans, lost 2 Panthers to mechanical failure, still confident. Day 3, American tank count now 52. They replaced losses overnight, impossible. Day 4, lost 1 Panther to fuel shortage. American tank count, 58. How? Day 5. No German tanks operational this sector. American tanks, impossible to count accurately. Request immediate reinforcement. The response never came. German reserves had been consumed by identical mathematical equations playing out across hundreds of miles of front line. The mathematics of replacement had become psychological warfare waged through statistical reality. German crews learned to fear not individual combat engagements, but the absolute certainty that destroyed American tanks would multiply overnight, like mechanical cancer spreading across European battlefields. October 1944, Hürtgen Forest. The smell of cordite and diesel exhaust hangs in autumn air like industrial fog that burns the throat and stings the eyes. Sergeant First Class Tom Bradley, a former Pittsburgh steel worker who understands machinery the way farmers understand soil, guides his Sherman Steel City through German defensive positions that have been systematically shattered by coordinated American armored tactics. Bradley's tank bears visible scars from 4 months' continuous combat operations, bullet impacts pockmarking the turret armor like steel acne, hastily welded patches covering shell fragment damage, replacement track sections that don't quite match the original steel color due to different foundry sources. But Steel City keeps advancing eastward because American logistics treat battle damage as temporary maintenance issues rather than permanent tactical losses. Behind Bradley, 37 more Shermans follow in precise tactical formation, spacing exactly 50 meters apart. Behind them, M4 recovery vehicles carry complete replacement engines, transmissions, gun barrels, final drive assemblies, and specialist mechanics who can swap major components in field conditions using portable cranes and standardized tools. German recovery capabilities, when they existed at all, focused on salvaging usable parts from completely destroyed vehicles rather than systematic component replacement. They weren't fighting tanks. They were fighting American maintenance philosophy that treated mechanical problems as minor operational delays rather than mission-ending tactical disasters. November 1944, Metz Fortress. Temperature drops to -5 degrees Celsius as early winter settles over medieval battlements never designed for mechanized warfare. French civilians huddle in basement shelters while German and American armor clash in narrow cobblestone streets that funnel tank movements into predictable killing zones. Hauptmann Josef Kleiner commands the last operational Panzer IV in his company, originally equipped with 14 tanks when arriving from training grounds in June 1944. Kleiner's after-action report, written by candlelight in a damaged cathedral, describes American tactical evolution happening in real time. Enemy tanks no longer attempt individual breakthrough attempts that German defensive planning can counter. They coordinate seamlessly with infantry, artillery, and close air support in integrated combined arms attacks that neutralize our prepared defensive advantages. When we destroy American tanks through superior tactical positioning, replacement vehicles arrive within hours, carrying different tactical approaches that incorporate lessons learned from previous engagements. This was the Sherman's most devastating capability, not individual technical superiority over German designs, but systematic tactical learning accelerated by industrial replacement capacity that allowed continuous battlefield experimentation without strategic penalty for tactical failure. They weren't fighting tanks. They were fighting American learning systems that treated combat losses as educational investments rather than irreplaceable strategic assets. December 1944, Battle of the Bulge. German forces launched their final major offensive operation in the Western Theater, with carefully hoarded fuel reserves and elite panzer units preserved for this decisive strategic gamble. For exactly 72 hours, Wehrmacht commanders experience what they interpret as renewed tactical success. Panzer spearheads advanced through surprised American positions, destroy dozens of Sherman tanks in tactical engagements, capture fuel supplies and ammunition dumps that sustain further offensive operations. Then American industrial capacity responds with mechanical fury that shocks German strategic planning at the highest levels. Within 1 week, exactly 7 days from the start of German offensive operations, replacement Sherman battalions arrived from Antwerp via Liberty ship convoys that had been loading American tanks, while German offensive preparations remained completely secret to Allied intelligence, not replacement tanks for destroyed units. Entirely new tank battalions with fresh crews, complete ammunition loads, and tactical intelligence updated with German offensive capabilities revealed during the previous week's fighting. Oberst Werner Mildenburg, commanding officer of Panzer Lehr Division remnants, reduced to 11 operational tanks, radios Wehrmacht headquarters with barely controlled panic audible through radio static. American replacement rate exceeds our most optimistic destruction estimates by documented factor of 4.1. We are destroying individual tanks in tactical engagements. They are replacing entire armored formations with strategic reserves. They weren't fighting tanks. They were fighting American strategic depth that made German tactical success mathematically temporary, regardless of individual battlefield excellence. January 1945, Bastogne relief operations. American Sherman formations break through German encirclement with coordinated attacks that demonstrate industrial warfare principles German doctrine hadn't anticipated or prepared to counter. rather than preserve elite armored units for decisive strategic engagements. American tactics treated Sherman battalions as expendable tools for achieving specific tactical objectives through overwhelming local superiority. Lieutenant Hans Kruger, sole survivor of Panzer Regiment 26, after his unit was systematically destroyed during Bastogne fighting, describes American armored tactics in his detailed post-war interrogation. They used tanks like artillery shells, fired at tactical objectives until the objective was destroyed, then immediately replaced destroyed tanks and continued operations without operational pause. Individual tank crews showed adequate training, but not exceptional individual skill. Their decisive advantage came from treating tank losses as acceptable operational costs rather than strategic disasters requiring tactical adaptation. This represented fundamental philosophical difference between German and American approaches to mechanized warfare. German doctrine emphasized preserving expensive, irreplaceable armored vehicles through tactical excellence and individual crew superiority developed through extensive training programs. American doctrine emphasized achieving tactical objectives through systematic application of adequate equipment deployed in overwhelming quantities that made individual preservation secondary to collective mission success. They weren't fighting tanks. They were fighting American operational philosophy that made individual tank survival less strategically important than collective tactical achievement through mathematical superiority. February 1945, Rhine River approaches. The muddy banks echo with mechanical sounds of American armor positioning for river crossing operations. Allied signals intelligence intercepts German radio traffic, revealing Wehrmacht's strategic desperation reaching absolute crisis levels. Generaloberst Siegfried Westphal, Army Group B Chief of Staff, transmits encrypted assessment to Berlin through increasingly unreliable communication networks. American armored strength this sector now documented at 847 operational tanks by multiple observation posts. Our intelligence estimates from December projected maximum 200 vehicles possible given documented previous destruction rates. Enemy replacement capabilities exceed all strategic planning calculations. Berlin's response, decoded from Enigma traffic by Bletchley Park, count verification impossible, numbers cannot be accurate. Westphal's confirmation transmitted 6 hours later with audible frustration. Count verified by multiple independent observation posts using direct visual confirmation. American tank columns extend 15 kilometers in tactical formation, stretching beyond visual horizon. Recommend immediate strategic withdrawal before tactical encirclement becomes strategically inevitable. They weren't fighting tanks. They were fighting American production capacity that made German strategic planning calculations obsolete through mathematical impossibility. The Sherman psychological impact intensified exponentially through documented German reactions to specific tactical encounters that revealed industrial warfare's devastating effectiveness. March 3, 1945, near Cologne. Oberfeldwebel Karl Steinmann, veteran Panzer commander, awarded the Knight's Cross with 2 years Eastern Front combat experience, engages American Sherman formation in what tactical doctrine suggests should be routine defensive encounter favoring German technical superiority. Steinmann's Panzer IV, equipped with long-barrel 75mm KWK-40 gun, capable of penetrating Sherman armor at ranges exceeding 1,200 meters, achieves perfect first-round kill on lead Sherman at 800 meters range. Excellent gunnery, textbook German tactics. 2nd Sherman destroyed with precision shot at 600 meters. 3rd Sherman disabled with track hit at 400 meters. Steinmann's crew celebrates successful defensive engagement. 3 American tanks destroyed with 3 shots fired. But tactical celebration transforms into psychological horror as more Shermans appear through battle smoke and debris. Not 3 additional tanks. Not 6 additional tanks. 17 more Shermans advance in coordinated tactical formation, firing systematically at Steinmann's position, while American infantry flanks through rubble using combined arms tactics that neutralize German defensive advantages. Steinmann's final radio transmission before abandoning his immobilized tank, "Sie hören nicht aufzukommen, they don't stop coming." This single tactical engagement encapsulated complete German psychological collapse when facing American armored doctrine that treated individual technical superiority as strategically irrelevant. Individual German tactical excellence and crew training remained valid at tactical level, but became strategically meaningless when facing enemies who treated combat losses as acceptable operational costs rather than strategic disasters. They weren't fighting tanks. They were fighting American tactical philosophy that made individual victories meaningless through systematic numerical superiority sustained by unlimited industrial replacement capacity. March 1945, crossing the Rhine. The Ludendorff Bridge at Remagen becomes focal point for desperate German defensive efforts as Wehrmacht engineers prepare demolition charges, while American Sherman formations approach from multiple directions with mechanical precision that German defenders describe as unstoppable industrial momentum, advancing like steel avalanche. General Major Richard von Bothmer commands German forces defending the bridge approaches with rapidly dwindling ammunition supplies and fuel reserves that cannot be replenished through disrupted supply networks. His tactical assessment, captured in Wehrmacht archives discovered decades later, reveals complete psychological transformation of German strategic thinking. American armored formations operate with industrial efficiency rather than traditional military tactics. They accept operational losses that would paralyze German operations, replace destroyed vehicles faster than our remaining artillery can effectively engage targets, and coordinate with close air support that provides continuous battlefield surveillance. Von Bothmer's most psychologically devastating observation: individual American tank crews demonstrate adequate but not exceptional combat skills compared to German panzer training standards. Their decisive tactical advantage derives from treating each Sherman as replaceable component in larger mechanical system rather than irreplaceable strategic asset requiring preservation through tactical excellence and individual crew superiority. German doctrine had never prepared Wehrmacht commanders to fight enemies who considered their primary weapons expendable tools rather than precious strategic resources requiring conservation through superior tactics and extensive crew training programs. They weren't fighting tanks. They were fighting American systems, thinking that made German tactical excellence strategically insufficient regardless of individual combat performance. Spring 1945, the Ruhr industrial heartland. Smoke rises from demolished Krupp steel mills. The acrid smell of burning oil hangs in the air like industrial funeral incense. Hauptmann Werner Schulz commands the remnants of 116th Panzer Division. 14 operational tanks total from an original strength of 160 vehicles. Through field glasses, he watches Sherman columns advance down the Autobahn with mechanical precision, resembling parade formations rather than combat maneuvers. His final combat report, discovered in Wehrmacht archives decades later, enemy employs tank formations as mobile artillery platforms rather than individual dueling weapons. Coordination between armor, infantry, and close air support represents integrated battlefield system that negates traditional German tank versus tank engagement doctrines. Ledi. While German engineers had perfected the King Tiger's massive 150mm frontal armor and devastating 80 Tiltiplium 43 gun, capable of destroying any Allied tank at ranges exceeding 3,000 meters, American production lines were solving completely different mathematical problems. The Krupp works in Essen produced tanks one at a time. each vehicle representing a masterpiece of metallurgical engineering, requiring skilled craftsmen, precision tooling, and increasingly unavailable strategic materials. Detroit produced tanks by the thousands, using Henry Ford's assembly line techniques that prioritized systematic speed over individual perfection, reliable adequacy over engineering excellence, sustainable production over handcrafted superiority. The final phase of Sherman's psychological dominance appeared in German communications during the systematic collapse of organized Wehrmacht resistance, April 1945, Ruhr pocket encirclement. General Feldmarschall Walter Model, completely surrounded by overwhelming American armored forces that outnumber his remaining tanks by ratios exceeding 30.1, radio's final strategic assessment to Wehrmacht High Command through failing communication networks. American tank concentrations, this operational area, exceed total German armored strength, remaining across all fronts combined. Individual tank technical quality becomes irrelevant when facing numerical superiority, approaching 20.1 ratios in forward combat positions. Model's transmission continues with professional military analysis that cuts through wartime propaganda with surgical honesty. Sherman tank individually inferior to our remaining Panther and Tiger vehicles in direct technical specifications and crew training standards. Collectively represents industrial warfare capability German strategic planning never anticipated or prepared to counter. Enemy systematically replaces entire tank battalions during time frame required for German forces to replace individual destroyed vehicles. The mathematics had become psychologically devastating for German commanders trained in tactical excellence and strategic resource conservation. American Sherman tactics demonstrated with brutal clarity that adequate military equipment deployed in unlimited quantities could overcome individual technical superiority through simple mathematical overwhelm that made tactical brilliance strategically obsolete. By April 1945, surviving Wehrmacht units reported Sherman sightings across a front stretching from Hamburg to Munich, from the Baltic coast to the Austrian Alps. Not specific tank units or identifiable formations, just endless intelligence reports of American armor present in overwhelming strength in operational sectors where no German tanks remained combat capable. The Workhorse had become omnipresent, a mechanical manifestation of American industrial capacity that German tactical brilliance, engineering superiority, and battlefield experience couldn't overcome through conventional military resistance. April 15, 1945. Berlin approaches. Soviet and American armored forces converge on German capital with combined tank strength exceeding total German armored vehicle production across 6 years of intensive warfare. In underground bunkers beneath the Reich Chancellery, Wehrmacht staff officers compile final intelligence assessments documenting Sherman effectiveness through industrial rather than tactical metrics. The most strategically revealing document, discovered in captured German archives decades later, summarizes Sherman battlefield impact with analytical precision. American M4 Sherman series achieved decisive strategic victory through production multiplication rather than individual combat superiority over German designs. German tactical doctrine proved tactically adequate for defeating specific enemy tanks in discrete battlefield engagements. German strategic doctrine proved strategically inadequate for defeating enemy industrial capacity that sustained continuous, systematic replacement of destroyed tactical assets. Tank Sergeant Johnny Peterson guides his Sherman Detroit Steel through Berlin's rubble-filled streets as German resistance collapses into isolated pockets of desperate defensive action. Peterson's tank shows extensive battle damage accumulated across 8 months of continuous European combat operations, replaced track sections from 3 different foundries, welded armor patches covering shell fragment impacts, completely new gun barrel installed after previous barrel wore out from excessive firing during sustained combat operations. But Detroit Steel continues advancing eastward toward final link-up with Soviet forces because American logistics treat battle damage as routine maintenance issues requiring systematic component replacement rather than strategic losses requiring tactical accommodation or mission modification. Behind Peterson, 41 more Shermans follow in tactical formation that demonstrates fundamental American armored doctrine. Overwhelming numerical presence sustained through industrial replacement capacity that makes individual combat losses strategically insignificant compared to collective tactical achievement. Tank Sergeant Bobby Martinez, former Ford assembly line worker from Detroit, commands Sherman Michigan Thunder through Nuremberg's rubble-filled streets. German civilians watch from bomb-damaged windows as American armor rolls past with quiet mechanical efficiency. Martinez's tank bears visible scars from 6 months of continuous combat operations. Welding patches covering the turret, replacement road wheels, a completely new transmission installed by field mechanics in a Belgian forest clearing. But Michigan Thunder keeps running, keeps fighting, keeps advancing toward Berlin. Behind Martinez, 43 additional Shermans follow in precise column formation. Behind them, supply trucks carry replacement parts, ammunition reserves, fuel, and hot meals for crews who sleep in their tanks and wake each morning to continue the relentless advance eastward. Final German radio intercept, April 28, 1945. Encrypted Wehrmacht communications decoded by Allied intelligence. Request immediate tactical assessment enemy armor concentrations. Berlin approaches multiple sectors. Accurate count impossible determine. Conservative estimate 800 to 1,200 operational tanks advancing simultaneously. Our remaining operational assets Eastern Front, 17 panzers total across all units. Recommend immediate surrender negotiations. The response never came through German communication networks. Wehrmacht command structure had completely collapsed under the mathematical weight of industrial defeat, made manifest in Sherman tank tracks churning through the heart of the Third Reich. They weren't fighting tanks. They were fighting American industrial mathematics that transformed adequate engineering into overwhelming strategic advantage through manufacturing multiplication German war economy couldn't hope to match. May 8, 1945, German unconditional surrender. Wehrmacht commanders sign surrender documents, acknowledging military defeat caused not by tactical inadequacy or technical inferiority of German equipment, but by strategic impossibility of matching American industrial production that sustained continuous Sherman replacement faster than German remaining forces could destroy them through superior individual combat performance. The final German appreciation of American Sherman strategy came too late to influence any tactical outcomes. A Wehrmacht technical assessment dated May 5, 1945, exactly 3 days before unconditional surrender, concluded with analytical honesty that pierced through years of wartime optimism and propaganda. American M4 series represents successful integration of adequate individual performance specifications with overwhelming collective operational presence across all combat theaters. Primary tactical lesson learned: numerical superiority transforms adequate military equipment into decisive strategic advantage. Industrial production capacity proves more strategically valuable than engineering perfection or individual crew training excellence. The generals who once laughed at the American sardine can learned through devastating battlefield experience that they weren't fighting individual tanks piloted by specific crews in discrete tactical engagements. They were fighting American factories, assembly lines, cross-Atlantic supply chains, Liberty ship convoys, and industrial capacity that transformed adequate military equipment into unstoppable strategic momentum through manufacturing multiplication no European industrial nation could hope to match. Post-war German military analysis, conducted by Wehrmacht officers in Allied prisoner-of-war camps, reached unanimous conclusions about Sherman tank strategic effectiveness that reshaped military thinking. American M4 series succeeded through industrial integration of adequate individual performance specifications with overwhelming collective battlefield deployment. Primary strategic lesson: numerical superiority sustained through continuous replacement transforms adequate military equipment into decisive strategic weapon regardless of individual technical superiority. In captured German military documents, one specific phrase appears with haunting repetition in final combat assessments: endless American tanks. Not superior American tanks, not technologically advanced American tanks, endless American tanks. The mathematical concept that Wehrmacht tactical doctrine had never prepared German commanders to counter effectively. German tank schools taught individual combat excellence, crew coordination, tactical positioning, mechanical maintenance, and gunnery precision. No German military manual explained operational procedures for fighting an enemy that replaced destroyed combat units faster than highly trained crews could destroy them through superior individual performance. The Workhorse earned its permanent place in military history not through individual technical excellence or tactical innovation, but through simple mechanical presence multiplied beyond German strategic comprehension. Everywhere German forces operated across European battlefields, all the time, day and night, in numbers that made organized military resistance mathematically impossible and strategic surrender tactically inevitable. American factories solved modern industrial warfare through multiplication principles that German strategic doctrine never anticipated. Adequate engineering deployed in unlimited quantities made individual excellence irrelevant and transformed tactical superiority into historical footnote written in steel and smoke. The laughter stopped forever when Wehrmacht commanders realized the fundamental truth that would reshape military strategic thinking for decades. In industrial warfare between modern nation-states, adequate equipment multiplied beyond the enemy's capacity to replace losses becomes more strategically valuable than superior equipment deployed in limited quantities, requiring conservation through tactical excellence. The Sherman didn't achieve victory through being the best individual tank. It achieved victory through being good enough in numbers, large enough to make best a meaningless concept in face of overwhelming mathematical reality that transformed American industrial capacity into unstoppable military force. They weren't fighting tanks. They were fighting American industrial civilization, made manifest in steel and gasoline, rolling across European battlefields in formations that proved mathematical reality could overcome tactical brilliance, strategic excellence, and individual heroism through simple, overwhelming presence sustained by industrial capacity. No military doctrine had prepared German commanders to counter effectively. 5.